When the mask mandate lifts in 10 days, a lot of things are going to change. So, what are your rights in the workplace? Let's bring in Alex Lucifero, partner at Samfiru Tumarkin LLP. Alex, good morning.
Good morning, Annette.
All right, some people are still a little wary about the idea of taking it off, may feel more comfortable still wearing a mask. So let me ask you this, can your employer make you take that mask off?
Well, it's going to be the case as of March 21st that masks effectively become optional. So I think in this case, Annette, it's going to be down to the particular workplace setting. I think if your employer is allowing you to take your mask off, there's going to be nothing wrong with that. Of course, it's going to be in line with what our government has allowed and what the regulations are going to be. That said, the opposite may be true as well. If your employer is actually going to ask you to keep your mask on, and there's a particular health and safety reason why that is. Maybe you work in a very tight work environment. Maybe you work with, some people that are at risk potentially health-wise. Your employer may actually be able to ask you to keep your mask on, even though it's after March 21st, and our provincial government no longer requires it.
So they would be able to ask you that and make it part of their own policy at the workplace that you keep it on?
I think so. I think for the time being, Annette, and while we're still kind of in the midst of COVID and until we see the numbers drop further, I would say that, again, depending on the particular setting, depending on the particular workplace, it may very well be reasonable for your employer to ask you to keep your mask on. It's not a particularly huge inconvenience or, a particularly a huge difficulty for employees, with one caveat, which has been the case throughout, the pandemic, which is if you have a health concern or a health condition or a medical condition as an employee that requires that you not wear a mask, those health issues need to be respected. Otherwise, again, depending on the workplace, your employer may very well ask you to keep your mask on.
In some workplaces, like restaurants that come to mind, if you're a server, for example, you come in contact with a lot of different people, you are close to them. A friend of mine's young adult daughter works in a restaurant, and she said her daughter is a little fearful about taking it off and would like to keep it on. Does her employer have the right to say, no, you got to take it off now. Otherwise, you're going to give the patrons the wrong impression that, you're sick or that there's COVID. Somebody here has COVID, that the perception there may scare people away. Does the daughter have the right to keep it on if that's just where her comfort level is at, given the fact that she's still in close contact with patrons?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's actually one of the industries I had in mind when I was just explaining my thoughts on the matter, the restaurant business. I think a lot of restaurant owners are actually going to perhaps do the opposite of what you were doing, just suggesting, and ask their employees to keep masks on. Now, in situations where the employee wants to keep their mask on, and there's a legitimate reason there, I think that's a reasonable position, and I don't think employers should be giving employees a hard time as a result. No matter what the industry, listen, there are always disputes between employees and employers. There are always disagreements. It's important employees and employers have those kinds of conversations. Reasonableness is ultimately the test. So if an employee has a legitimate health concern and they want to keep their mask on for that reason, I think that employee is going to be allowed to keep it on. And the opposite may be true as well if an employer is requiring employees to wear masks. Restaurants are going to be one of those industries, I think, where these conversations are going to come up one way or the other.
What's your advice to an employee if there is a bit of a dispute over whether or not to wear a mask? Either way, take it on, leave it off. What do they do? Do they first have that conversation with the employer, find out if there's a policy, go to a lawyer? What's your advice on that?
Yeah, I think the initial conversation should be coming from the employer. So prior to March 21st, I think employers should be communicating to their employees what the game plan is going to be in the workplace post March 21st. After that initial communication, whatever the employer's position is going to be, if employees have concerns, absolutely, Annette, they should be going to their employer, go to your manager, go to your HR person if you have one, have those conversations, express your concerns, express your position. Hopefully you can be able to come to a resolution. Certainly if something more serious happens, if you lose your job as a result, or if you are being treated unfairly in the workplace, the next step would be to speak with an employment lawyer and make sure you know what your rights are and what your obligations are as an employee in the workplace.
All right, great to chat with you as always, Alex. Thank you.
Thank you.